Tonight, the race to find survivors.
I thought I'm gonna die.
Thousands are dead in the wake of a powerful earthquake in Morocco. Plus, never forget.
Today is the 22nd anniversary of your son's first day of preschool, and Anthony and I just had our first full day of high school.
Remembering the terror attacks of 9/11 and countering China.
It's not about containing China. It's about having a stable base in the Indo-Pacific.
The U.S.-China relationship and the 2024 presidential race. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The nation pauses to remember a day that changed the world. Good evening. In Washington, I'm Caitlin Burke. Today marks 22 years since the attacks of 9/11. For some, that September morning might seem like a distant memory. But for many Americans, the pain this day brings is constant. CBN News Washington correspondent Hillary Powell joins us now with a look at how the nation is honoring not only the victims of September 11th, but also their loved ones. Hillary?
Well, Caitlin, there's a reason the words never forget are said each anniversary of 9/11. As Americans look back on the horror and the legacy of that fateful day, they seek to show that nearly 3,000 people who were killed that day, though they're gone, they will never be forgotten. The sound of taps at the Pentagon amid a flag unfurled, both signs of a nation still mourning the deadliest terror attack on U.S. soil. 22 years later, remembrances stretch from the East Coast to the West, as Americans both grieve and honor the nearly 3,000 people killed when hijacked planes crashed into.
We will always honor the memory of our fallen teammates, and we will always strive to be worthy of the memory of those we lost.
In New York City, the skies where the Twin Towers once stood are once again visible in a tribute. Two bright lights beaming for miles. 2,753 people died there, and today, for the 22nd consecutive year, their names read aloud. In recent years, a new generation is honoring those killed, many of whom weren't alive when it happened. At the annual ceremony in Lower Manhattan Monday, for the reading of the names, dignitaries including Vice President Kamala Harris, New York's governor, mayor, and its senator stood with still grieving families. One child's voice honored the family hero she never met.
And for my uncle, firefighter Jimmy Richards, tomorrow would have been your 52nd birthday. And even though I never got to meet you, I will never forget you.
In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, memories of the heroic crew and passengers of United Flight 93 who prevented even greater disaster. One chaplain offers a prayer for those still struggling with a loss that changed America.
I thank you for the comfort given to those who have lost friends or loved ones on that fateful day, and how you continue to give peace to those who seek it.
President Joe Biden is also offering words of comfort. On X, he writes, "The American story itself changed on this day 22 years ago, but what could not and will not change is the character of this nation." Returning from Vietnam, President Biden also marked the tragic anniversary by addressing troops in Alaska.
Hillary, it's hard to believe it's been 22 years since the attacks of 9/11. How are the events of that day still playing out for some?
Yes, it's really hard to believe, Caitlin, that families are still receiving closure in the form of positive identification, some of which have taken decades. Authorities confirmed the identification of 2 people who died in the attack just days before this anniversary. Caitlin?
Thanks, Hillary. Turning overseas, time is ticking for rescue teams combing through the rubble of Morocco's devastating earthquake. After a weekend of recovery efforts, more than 2,500 people are now confirmed dead. While the quake damaged the city of Marrakesh, some of the worst devastation is in rural mountain villages. Dale Hurd has more.
Soldiers and international aid teams continue to search remote mountain towns hit hardest by the deadly quake that also injured thousands and has displaced an estimated 300,000 people. This was the moment the shaking began as residents began to realize what was happening. The epicenter was high in the Atlas Mountains, just south of Marrakesh. The worst destruction was in rural communities on unpaved roads that snake up the mountainous terrain now blocked by fallen rocks. In a region where bricks are often made from mud, Friday's earthquake easily toppled buildings, trapping people inside and sending others fleeing in terror. Rescuers trying to dig through the rubble to find any possible survivors pulled this person out, injured but alive. In the village of Taradont, residents comforted each other. This man says 2 of his daughters died when the ceiling collapsed on them as they slept. Another man lost his wife, daughter, parents, and sister-in-law. Thousands lined up to donate blood.
We saw on the news that they need donation for blood, and I didn't even think twice.
Many still waiting for food, water, and electricity. The Biden administration has reached out to the Moroccan government to help provide immediate assistance.
We're working expeditiously to ensure American citizens in Morocco are safe, standing ready to provide any necessary assistance to the Moroccan people as well.
CBN's Operation Blessing is on the ground working with a local pastor to help victims in rural areas. Today, they're working to deliver tents to villages as well as solar lamps for people living outside after the quake. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Christian humanitarian aid group World Help is also on the ground in Morocco. Craig Cole is the Director of International Partnerships for World Help, and he joins us now. Craig, we're still in the early days of this disaster, but how is World Help currently responding in Morocco?
Well, we're working through our network of international partners there in Morocco, a group of believers who are on the ground there. They're reporting back to us on the needs, the great needs that they're finding, especially in the remote areas surrounding Marrakesh. Right now, we're working with them to provide the essentials that people need in this time of crisis: food, clean water, shelter, and blankets.
And would you say that those 3 are the greatest needs right now? What are you hearing back from your partners on the ground?
Absolutely. Those folks who are in the remote areas are telling us the vast majority of the resources are going into Marrakesh, into the city, and they're just not getting the things that they need out in the countryside.
You all are providing that physical help, but you also look to provide spiritual hope. Can you talk about how you're doing that with the people that you're able to encounter?
Yeah, the mantra of World Help has always been help for today and hope for tomorrow. So no matter what the crisis is or the disaster that we respond to, we always make a very strong and concerted effort that we want to meet the physical needs of people who are suffering, but we also want to reach them spiritually as well. Now, Morocco is a closed country. You're not able to share the gospel freely there. And so we have to get pretty creative with our partners there on how they can build relationships with people and share the gospel with them.
When you go into a country facing this kind of devastation, how long do you plan to stay?
We're in it for the long haul. As has been the case through many similar disasters, we want to provide that emergency aid right away, but we also want to be there for the long haul to make sure that people can get back on their feet and start living productive lives.
What's kind of next as this is still very developing, and how can we be praying for your efforts there, for the people there?
Yeah, we definitely are asking people to pray. Prayer is the most important thing at this time. There's still a lot of people who are unaccounted for, especially, like I said, in those remote areas. So pray that those people would be located, that they would be safe. Pray for the people who survived this deadly quake. Pray for peace and comfort for them. And pray that they would receive the emergency supplies that they need, the food, the water, and the shelter.
All right. Craig Cole with World Help, thank you so much for the work that you all are doing there, and we will definitely be keeping the people of Morocco in our prayers. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
China's ambitions draw the attention of the United States. Coming up, how the communist regime could impact the 2024 race for the White House. Welcome back. The world is watching as two of America's adversaries are expected to meet this week in Russia. Both the Kremlin and North Korea's official news agency report Kim Jong-un is traveling to Moscow at the invitation of President Vladimir Putin. The meeting raises global concern the two could be planning a weapons deal for Russia's war in Ukraine. It's unclear exactly when and where the two will meet, but it could be as early as Tuesday. U.S. officials say the clear goal for Putin is resupplying Russian forces as Ukraine continues its counteroffensive against the Kremlin. Meanwhile, the U.S. is deepening strategic ties with Vietnam. President Biden traveled to Hanoi over the weekend at a time of growing concern over China's rising influence in the region.
The United States is a Pacific nation, and we're not going anywhere. It's not about containing China. It's about having a stable base in the Indo-Pacific.
The U.S. and Vietnam elevated ties to a, quote, comprehensive strategic partnership, the same level of relationship Vietnam has with both China and Russia. President Biden insists the move is not meant to be hostile, but rather to ensure global economic growth and stability. The Chinese government, however, disagrees, saying the U.S. needs to abandon the Cold War mentality and zero-sum game mindset. For more, let's turn now to CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, while he was in Vietnam, President Biden said the new strategic partnership in the Indo-Pacific region is not, quote, about countering China. Do you buy that?
Well, no. But there is some truth to what he said overseas, which is to have a base of support there in the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, that base of support is really kind of those three countries, the United States, Japan, and South Korea. And of course, they want Vietnam and others in the region, but definitely Vietnam to be a part of that strategic alliance. But let's remember here, Caitlin, it's very important to understand that Vietnam, as much as they're saying this is an alliance, they're calling it, Vietnam is calling it a strategic alliance and a bit symbolic. And meanwhile, they may be working on some sort of deal with the Russians as it relates to potential some sort of arms deal with Russia. So Vietnam's trying to have it both ways, and the Biden administration is trying to head Vietnam off at the pass, if you will.
How do you think the U.S.-China relationship will play out in the 2024 presidential campaign?
Well, it's going to be a steroid situation. In other words, all of the Republican candidates are going to be, I'm the toughest on China. I'm the toughest on China. Maybe Vivek Ramaswamy, not as much, though. He has said that he believes the way to end the Ukraine war is to basically stop the Russia-China military alliance from gaining steam. So I think everybody's going to be on board with trying to say they're the toughest on China. And the Biden administration has given some indications there that they're trying to do a bit of appeasement over there. And that's why many of the Republicans are saying, no, we need to get tough on them, whether it be over what happened with Wuhan in the lab over there, fentanyl. Remember, let's understand the precursor chemicals of fentanyl. We hear a lot about fentanyl coming across the border, but the precursor chemicals, try saying that 5 times fast, of fentanyl actually are developed in China. And then it comes over through the border into the United States. So that's a big deal. And we haven't even talked about TikTok and some of the universities as well that China is infiltrating here in the United States.
Do you think that that tough on China strategy is a winning one? We heard Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley say this weekend that China is an enemy of the United States.
Yeah, I think it is a winning one to a degree. I mean, I don't think China, being tough on China is the #1 issue that's going to affect Americans across the board. It'll be the economy, it'll be parental rights. But I think China is right up there. And I think Nikki Haley is onto something. As you mentioned, she said that over the weekend, that China is an enemy of the United States. She talked about that on CNN. And one of the things she brought up, which really is underreported in this country, is these Confucius Institutes. In other words, these institutes where China, in essence, sets up these Confucius Institutes of academic excellence on campus. But what they're doing in the process, according to Nikki Haley and many American politicians, is actually downloading and trying to get many of the United States secrets on research and development at these universities. And I think that's going to be a bit of a contention going forward in this election.
All right, David Brody, CBN News Chief Political Analyst. We appreciate your insights as always.
Caitlin, it's been a pleasure.
From helplessness to hope, how the events of September 11th united the nation. Right after this. For many people who lived through it, the memories of September 11th, 2001 are forever etched in their minds. From the kid at school whose teacher told them the news to the very people covering it. Each has specific memories. Take a look as my colleagues here at the CBN News DC Bureau share their reflections of that day.
That there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
9/11 is a day that you don't want to remember, but that you will never forget.
Apparently, a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
I have a vivid memory of sitting on my parents' bed, watching as the second plane flew into the second tower. And I mean, there's so much unknown at the time. There's so many questions, and there were no answers.
We still had school that day, but the feeling at school was tense. It was, everybody was on edge. Nobody really knew what was happening or what was going on.
You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way. There it goes.
Both trade towers, where thousands of people work on this day, Tuesday, have now been attacked and destroyed.
In newsrooms, they're always hustling and bustling, and there's always structure to the day. We have a morning editorial meeting where we assign stories, and we know what our lead story is going to be, and we know what people are doing. And that day, we spent hours in front of our TV monitors, just watching as the rest of the world was watching.
And the same image was on all of the television screens, even on the Weather Channel and ESPN. And you know, at that point, it really wasn't clear what was happening. You could just sense in the newsroom air that it was something that was huge. I think it's the quietest I've ever heard a newsroom.
Everybody go straight. This ambulance is about 100 feet ahead.
This is the World Trade Center on the floor. God bless America.
Let's go to the White House. Claire Shipman is on the phone. Claire, what's that we're looking at?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. All we know is it's a gigantic plume of smoke coming from behind the old executive office building. It's like nothing I've ever seen. I mean,
Claire, let me interrupt you for a second. We now have fire confirmed at the Pentagon.
I got into a news satellite truck with our weekend anchor, a photographer, and our satellite truck operator, and we drove up here to Washington, D.C. And we parked our satellite truck, I remember, down the street from the Pentagon so we could have the smoldering background. It was really surreal going from seeing the images on television to being in the presence of where it happened. And I'll never forget just the smell that was in the air of, it's that burning fire, ash, like things have been burned smell. That really sticks out to me.
Actually, I worked at the IBM in Bethesda, Maryland. You know, they kind of dismissed us from work a couple of hours early. And I remember as I got on 270, I tried to call the daycare, and all the circuits were busy, like no calls were going through. And in that moment, you know, I guess for one of the first times, I felt helpless.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
I was at my church in Moldova, which is an Eastern European country. We had a Tuesday night prayer service, and all of a sudden, somebody walked up to the pastor and gave him a little note. He, unfolded the note, and he just said, "We all need to stop, and we have to pray." We just got word that the United States was attacked.
At the time, I just wanted family close, my loved ones close, and my son was there with me, so I was hugging him tighter and squeezing him tighter. My friend and I just stopped and prayed.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
One thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together.
I do remember coming out of 9/11 was this great sense of unity. You know, Americans really came together.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
We covered events that, like interfaith events, for example, that were happening in the community, people that you wouldn't normally see together, gathering around with candlelight, having moments of silence, moments of prayer.
Even though I couldn't understand what was happening and there were questions and there, of course, was fear and anxiety, there was still a sense of peace. I know churches had vigils and prayers, and I believe that in many respects is what helped the country to rally and to move on.
And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
A prayer still echoed across America today. We'll be back with more Faith Nation right after this. Finally tonight, a marriage milestone led to a special surprise for one New Jersey couple. Cheers to 50 years. That's the message written across a billboard next to Interstate 95 in Northeast Philadelphia. The surprise message for Dennis and Betty Field came courtesy of their 4 kids. They decided to mark their parents' 50th wedding anniversary with a week-long message on a rotating billboard. Now the family can look back on their parents' love along with the rest of rush hour commuters. Well, happy anniversary to the Fields. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. Have a great night.